a warm welcome, a very, very warm welcome. It's been a scorcher of a day, and I'm so impressed that almost everyone who signed up to come, plus a few others, have come tonight, even despite the heat and the oppression that we're all feeling. But thank you for being here. This is great. I'm sure our guest speaker, Tudor Griffiths, will be excited to have so many people here from his old stomping ground in Gloucester and Cheltenham area. So I wanted to just give you a bit of introduction about Gateway Theology School, because this is called the Gateway Forum. Did I mention my name is Dan Button? I happen to be the director of the Gateway Theology School, just so you know who I am. But I will be stepping out of the way very soon and handing over to our special speaker for this evening. But Gateway Theology School started almost 10 years ago. This is our 10th year, and we're going to be, well, it's our 9th year. We'll be celebrating our 10th anniversary sometime next year in May. So we're planning to do something special for that. It's hard to believe, but thanks to God's providence and grace, He's somehow helped us get through 10 years, including COVID and everything else. So one of the recent things that we've started doing is this Gateway Forum. But Gateway Forum has only really started since last year. What Gateway Theology School mainly does is teach courses, and we do other events as well, sometimes special day outs or weekends or different kinds of events. But really, the idea is to bring theology, and that's a scary term, I know. Some people think, well, theology, oh, that's not for me. That's an academic word. That's for the ivory tower and the students, and I've left that behind long ago. But actually, I'm trying to redeem the word theology because it's a wonderful word. Because theology is really, it's not the study of God, it's how we think about life and the world and ourselves and everything in relation to God. And so theology is thinking together as Christians. So theology does not belong just in the ivory tower. So the idea of Gateway Theology School is to bring theology out of its, ivory tower academic environment and back into the hands of all God's people everywhere, well, as far as we can reach, which is pretty much Gloucestershire based as far as I can commute. Now when COVID came along, we started teaching online courses. So instead of just having on-site where I go out to where people are, we're called the theology school that comes to you. And I know you're coming from different churches all around the area. If you would like to run a course at your church, doesn't need to be the whole church, it's a small group of, a dozen or 15 or 20 people, that would be fantastic. And I would come out to you. I'd be delighted to do that. Me or one of my colleagues. I'm not the only one who teaches for Gateway, but that's the idea of it. Some of our courses are online, and we have a newsletter that comes out about once a month whenever I manage to get around to it. And that's why I've asked for people to put down your emails. I'll add you to the newsletter list. If you don't want to get the newsletter, you can just unsubscribe very easily. But it just helps me also keep track of how many people have come tonight so that I can report to my trustees at the end of the year and that sort of thing. Now, Gateway is trying to fill a niche because so many Christians are part of churches that don't have a forum where we can go deeper and we can discuss together and we can do theology together. Because remember, I said it's how we think about all these topics in relation to God. So the we is very important, doing theology together. And it's great that all of you are here, but even in this environment, apart from the Q&A, that's a great way to do theology together with Q&A. We'll have time for that at the end. But in our churches, even if you have really good preaching and really, sound good teaching, it's all one directional. And we don't usually have a forum where people can engage and discuss together. And that's what we're trying to provide. So if you are interested in learning a bit more about Gateway Theology School, I have these cards, which will just kind of give a little introduction to some of the courses. The best way to find out more about it is just to go online. and see our website, and gives you a whole list of all the courses. There are articles that I put out every month or so, just short, like 3-minute articles about different theological topics that are a little bit tongue-in-cheek, a bit fun. And lastly, I would like to say that thank you. Many of you have kindly stopped and given a cash donation. I think I said in the email that Gateway Forum was started as a new idea, but it does take a lot of effort. There's a lot of organization that goes into these things, and we don't really have any external funding. So, if God puts it on your heart to give a gift, a contribution towards the forum this evening, just to cover the cost, or the really fantastic way, if you think that Gateway is doing something that's needed and good as a ministry, and you would like to support us with a small monthly donation, you can become a friend of GTS. And as a little token of thanks, there's a lovely GTS mug with Erasmus on it, which I forgot to bring with me to show you. But we have mugs that we give out to our friends of Gateway. It's just a token, but that's really a fantastic way to support this ministry. And I do really apologize. My card reader that has been working fine suddenly isn't working this evening. I can't seem to work it out. So if you have cash, great. If you don't and would like to give a gift by either a transfer or a card, it's all on here. You can do it through the website. But please, if you don't mind, just tell me how much you've given tonight so that I can note that down, because it's important that we can see what's being given towards this event, so that I don't mix it up with other giving, because we're trying to see, how much we're gaining, losing in running these events, and what we need to do in the future. So that would be a big help. And also, if you are gift aid eligible, we have some forms there, and that's a huge help as well. We're a very small organization. We're running on a shoestring budget, so every little donation really makes a huge difference, and we do appreciate it. I would like to now introduce our speaker. This is a very special speaker to Rosie. Rosie is in the back. She's my wife there. She's been manning the kitchen, womaning the kitchen, I should say. Thank you, Rosie, for all your help. And we have known Tudor Griffiths, the Reverend Dr. Tudor Griffiths, for a very long time. Is it canon as well? I think you were a canon. Yes, Reverend Canon Dr. Tudor Griffiths. He has all these accolades, and yet he's one of the kindest, most gentle, humble men you could ever meet. But we first met Tudor when we went out as missionaries to Uganda, and he came out to visit because he had been there before us. When it was before it became Uganda Christian University, it was Bishop Tucker Theological College, and he had been there during some of the really tough years. And he came back to visit. We met him. Never thought we'd see him again. We come back to England years later, and lo and behold, there he is, Vicar of St. Matthew's in Cheltenham. And sometime after that, he actually brought me into St. Matthew's to do some work with his discipleship teams for a few months. So I worked under Tudor, and then then he was given a different role in the diocese. I won't pretend to know what that role was, but it was conciliation ministry with the churches that were going through rough times. And so he's been a missionary, a minister, an academic, a historian, many things. And just when we thought he had retired and we saw the last of him, lo and behold, he gets elected as mayor of Chepstow. So my goodness. So whatever he says about retirement, take it with a grain of salt, I think. But I'm really, really pleased to be able to bring Tudor Griffiths in as our speaker. And I'll just read what he wrote about. He said, Tudor was born and brought up in South Wales. He was married for 20 years to Nelica from Holland, with whom he had 2 sons. Ordained in Brecon Cathedral, he spent the majority of his career serving in both ministry and mission in Wales, Uganda, locally in Cheltenham and Gloucester, before retiring to the Welsh borders. And then I added, only to become the mayor of Chepstow. Tudor is an author, historian, theologian with a doctorate in mission history. And for the last 25 years, so Nelica sadly died. For the last 25 years, he's been married to Anna and enjoys immensely being a grandfather of 5. He's going to be speaking about a topic near and dear to his heart. In fact, so near and dear that he has just written a book about it. It's called The Rest of Life, and you'll see on the back table there are some copies of his book. And at the end, if you'd like to come back and buy one, I think they're on sale for £10. That would be great. And lastly, just to say a couple ideas about why we thought retirement. You know, I said theology is about all these things. We've had Gateway forums on artificial intelligence and robots, one on a woman who was the Josephine Butler, the patron saint of prostitutes, who was lived in Cheltenham and Oxford for a time. We had one on the Nicene Creed at 1700 years, and now this is our 4th on the rest of life. And we can say that retirement raises questions of identity. Who am I now that I'm no longer the person I was working as, my working title? And Tudor will explore some of the biblical teaching about identity in Christ that can help not only in retirement, but in preparation for that day, when that day that hits us all at some point. And he will explore theologically the biblical idea of rest as a helpful way of thinking about retirement as a kind of Sabbath of life. So it's the last stage of life, but in the meantime, we can live in joyful hope while not being unrealistic about the challenges that retirement brings. And along the way, he's going to draw on the wisdom from various sources, including Ecclesiastes and other parts of the Bible, and also the 18th century poet and hymn writer William Cowper. So I think this talk will give us lots of questions and maybe even some answers about how to think about retirement. So come on up, Tudor. Give him a big round of applause. Thank you very, very much.
Dan, you're too kind. You really are. Do you know, I wondered whether you may have mentioned one of the things that I was involved with around here was right at the beginning with GTS. I was one of the trustees, and I remember lots of conversations with Dan and others about the vision and how it would work out. And as someone's involved at the beginning, incredibly proud, really, to see all that Dan has done and is doing. And it's so wonderful to see vision actually translating into reality. So well done, Dan, and thank you. Well, this is the topic for this evening. Thank you indeed for inviting me. Now, I was going to introduce it by saying that this is one way of spending time between a Wimbledon semi-final and a World Cup quarter-final. That was when I thought that this evening's kickoff was at 10 o'clock. And I thought I'd timed it perfectly because I'll arrive home in time. So I had a bit of a shock in the car driving up to find that kickoff is at 8 o'clock. So tonight's is going to be a very short... No, if I'm going to miss it, so are you. The lead into retirement for me was COVID. And it meant that the experience of retiring was ending with a whimper, not a bang. It kind of petered out ministry. And then I was retired. I couldn't do much during COVID, and then retired. It was a very odd time. Before retirement came, I did go on one or two pre-retirement courses that the Church of England actually organises and encourages you to go on. And to be fair, there was some practical help in the retirement course, pre-retirement, but there was the assumption that I would be wanting to do some ministry, and I just wasn't sure about that. There were quite a few assumptions that I felt actually didn't quite fit. I wanted, in the lead up to retirement, actually to find some book that could really help with thinking about retirement, particularly from a biblical or from theological perspective on retirement. And probably didn't look hard enough, but actually couldn't find anything. So decided to try and work on putting something together from scratch. Now, retirement, I think retirement in the Bible, it's often thought, I've heard it said, that retirement is not a biblical, there's no retirement in the Bible. But there is. There is. I'm sure you're all very familiar with this passage from the book of Numbers, chapter 8. Let me share it with you. The Lord said to Moses, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, this applies to the Levites. From 25 years old and upwards, they shall begin to do duty in the service of the tent of meeting. And from the age of 50 years, they shall retire from the duty of the service and serve no more. They may assist their brothers in the tent of meeting in carrying out their duties, but they shall perform no service. Thus you shall deal with the Levites in arranging their duties. And they would be paid for in the same way. So it's worth asking, if you're involved in church ministry under the age of 50, giving the biblical precedent that biblically retirement should be at the age of 50 with the same pay as before, it might be worth trying, but I'm not sure you're going to get away with it. Dan mentioned I married Anna in the middle of ministry, and I did say to my bishop at the time that there's biblical precedent that for a man to take a wife, for a soldier to take a wife, gave him a year out so they could enjoy each other's company, and should have known better than to tackle Archbishop Rowan about that, because he just raised an eyebrow and said, the rubrics have changed. So retirement as a biblical concept, well, that's the only reference that you can find actually to retirement. Now, the experience of retirement, it varies hugely, doesn't it? I tried to find a picture which gives a sense of the variety of folk. It is the last major life stage. And 1 in 6, I found, are in the UK, of those who are retired, are classed as living in relative poverty. 1 in 6. Defined as the household income being below 60% of the median after housing. Of course, once you start talking about poverty, we come right up against difficulties of definition. What exactly do you mean by poverty? It's about having a lack of choice. It's about having a struggle to make ends meet. It's about food banks. It's about community fridges, as we have in Chepstow. It's about negotiating a benefit system. And the statistics show that it's much harder for people from ethnic minorities. It's harder for people in rented accommodation and single-person households. I wanted just, though, to acknowledge this at the beginning, because retirement is not one thing for all. As I say, it's the last major life stage. And what I share this evening and what we think together, what I share, I have found helpful, sharing it with you in the hope, really, that you might find it helpful as well. I think there may be, when it comes to retirement, some common questions, particularly among a group like this who would come together to think theology. And the following perspectives might help. I've tried to structure it around 3 key words. Now, Dan did say that there's a book in this, and I know some of you have actually read it. So if you'd like to, I'll hand over the talk if you like. But the rest of life, the front cover, you can't see it very well, but if you can, it's got blossom on it. And those of you who've read the book will know the answer to this question. It's almond blossom. And the almond blossom is there for a particular reason. It's a reference to Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, the last chapter of Ecclesiastes, which has a picture. Let me just read these verses to you. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Well, for some of us, it's a bit late. Before the days of trouble come, and the years draw near when you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return with the rain. On the day when the guards of the house tremble, and the strong men are bent, and the women who grind cease working, because they are few, and those who look through the window see dimly. When the doors on the street are shut, and the sound of the grinding is low, and one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of song are brought low. When one is afraid of heights and terrors are in the road, the almond tree blossoms. The grasshopper drags itself along, and desire fails, because all must go to their eternal home. And the mourners will go about the streets before the silver cord is snapped and the golden bowl is broken, and the pitcher is broken at the fountain, and the wheel broken at the cistern, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the breath returns to God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the teacher. All is vanity. That's encouraging, isn't it? perhaps it's a picture a bit like the that dilapidated house. That's what came to mind with that story from Ecclesiastes. And of course, it's not about the house at all, is it? When the clouds return, the guards of the house tremble, and the strong men are bent. The women who grind cease working. How are the teeth? And because they are few, look through the windows are dim. Last time I went to have my eyes checked, he said, oh, it looks like there's a cataract beginning there. And one rises up at the sound of the bird. How's your sleeping, especially these warm nights? Afraid of heights, fear grows. You see terrors on every road. We're driving in Gloucester's notorious. And the almond tree blossoms. Well, mine hasn't blossomed, but some of you are blessed with that white hair. You know, all these signs of age. And then gloriously, he doesn't talk about, and then you die. He moves to the scene of mourning. And that's the reality. The reality of getting older. Stuff happens to us, which is not always welcome. Last week or so, I've had a bit gout, which is why I've got these shoes on. I tried to put some nice shoes on, so I was coming to Dan's thing, I couldn't put them on. It's all a sign, isn't it? You know, just getting on, getting older. And that story is typical of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes, for its name, is the least ecclesiastical of books. And lovely, it's written by Koheleth. Use that name. It's translated variously as the teacher, the preacher, the convener, the chairman, the keynote speaker. It could be all of those things. It probably is a sort of mixture of all of those things. Koheleth, the wise man. And the book is about, well, he'd been there and done that all the way through. Well, and if not done that, certainly observed that. And that whole Ecclesiastes is this book of wisdom, ancient book of wisdom. And wisdom is very different in the ancient world from what we might think of as Western linear thinking. It's much more familiar to those of us who've been in Africa and other parts of the world, where wisdom is more a sharing of ideas and insights and then coming to a conclusion. I want to think about two things, really. Can you identify that? Sorry? Pink Floyd? Dark Side of the Moon. Yeah, brilliant album. Warmly commended to you. One of the tracks, one of the best known tracks is Time. Yeah? And perhaps you can hear those clocks ringing in the background. And you run to catch up with the sun, but it's sinking, racing around to come up behind you again. Sun is the same in a relative way, but you're older, shorter of breath, and one day closer to death. Every year is getting shorter, never seem to find the time. Plans that either come to naught or half a page of scribbled lines. Hanging on in quiet desperation is the English way. The time is gone, the song is over. Thought I'd something more to say. I think Koheleth would have loved that. In my first wife, Nelleke, was Dutch, and used to love taking the kids, two boys, to Holland, and would go to a lovely game park, theme park, which is well known in Holland, not elsewhere, Efteling. Does anyone know the Efteling? And been there? Oh, okay. It's one of the well-kept secrets of the Dutch. Various rides, and there is one where you sit down and you're in this chair, you're strapped in, and go around various scenes, and then after a bit you're swung round and face the other way and see where you have been, and you carry on, you move backwards for a point. And in many parts of the world, certainly in Africa and in the ancient Near East, that sense of moving backwards into the future is very important. It's certainly there as a background for Ecclesiastes. You know, we think, don't we, in the Western way, we walk into the future, we face the future. But for Ecclesiastes, for the Koheleth, it was more the other way. The past is what you know. That is unknown. And you move backwards into the unknown. And you go into the unknown, unseeing. And for Koheleth, the vanity, the word translated vanity, is so important. We saw it in chapter 12. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What is that? It's about breath, and it's two things really. It's insubstantial, and it's fleeting. And he kept repeating this refrain. And when we think about time in retirement, you might realize perhaps that when we retire, we lose our customary markers. The week changes, and we need to set new markers because the old have changed. Ecclesiastes 3 tells us that everything has its time, everything has its season, but it's known only to God. God, though, has set a sense of eternity, purpose, if you like, into our minds. But that doesn't mean we can see what's coming down the track. And that theme is repeated a number of times in Ecclesiastes. And Koheleth also talks a lot about work. It's worth reading Ecclesiastes, reading it and just noting the sort of things that Koheleth actually says about work. For instance, give you two verses. Chapter 2, verse 22. What do mortals get from all the toil and strain, with which they toil under the sun? For all their days are full of pain, and their work is vexation. Even at night, their minds do not rest. Does that ring bells for anyone? And then in the next chapter, chapter 3, verse 22, so I saw, that there is nothing better than that all should enjoy their work, for that is their lot. Enjoy the work. And there's that theme with work, both the negative and the positive. And Koheleth doesn't reconcile them. He just sets them side by side because they are both true. And both are true to his experience and quite possibly to ours as well. So what we find in Koheleth is a theme of noticing, which you have. Deliberately. Noticing. Anyone? He's been in the news recently. Hockney. It's one of his Yorkshire paintings. Yeah? And one of the themes that Hockney banged on about was noticing. Walk through the countryside and notice. And his paintings, particularly the Yorkshire ones, were about noticing. Like many artists, I suppose musicians would say, would focus in on listening, noticing the way it is. Do we notice that last week, in one of the joys of retirement is a bus pass, and travel into Chepstow with the bus, and very unusually there's another bloke at the bus stop. I was chatting with him a bit, and he was saying how last year he'd had a heart operation, and since then he'd had a stroke, and he was really struggling. And he said, it's been like this, and I found out he's 10 years younger than me, Noticing and reflecting on what you notice. And my custom often is to catch the bus into town and then walk home. And walking back, and there's a bloke on the bench taking a breather. And just say hello. And he said, "You look happy." What? It must be a good podcast I'm listening to. So, yeah, gosh, yes, the Lord is good. I think then, I should have said much more, led him to Christ and so on. Oh, dear. But it's passing and noticing. And that importance, I think. And one thing I think that Ecclesiastes, Koheleth's reflections on noticing, they give permission, I think, for loose ends and holding things together that I can't quite reconcile. Thoughts that are hard to reconcile. I used to think I got it sewn up theologically. Loose ends, but it doesn't give you permission for anything, because at the very end of Ecclesiastes, Koheleth says, all has been heard, the end of the matter, fear God. Yeah? It's not a logical conclusion as we would draw it, but having noticed all these things that he's reflected on, the conclusion is fear God. So my first key word is noticing, spelt properly. Second key word is identity. Identity, the question which often comes at retirement is, now that I am no longer fill in that blank, who am I? I do wonder whether identity is something that is more typically male, about finding your identity in your job. I don't know. I'm not going to argue that point. I just want to suggest it as a possibility. But identity is a contested issue, isn't it, in today's world? I want to suggest 3 questions, actually, that can help with the reflection. The first fits in with that little observation about the chair that turns round and faces backwards. What is my story? What is my story? On the surface, that's a very simple question. But once we start probing it, our memories are always selective, and have, shall we say, variable reliability, because we all necessarily have filters. As a sort of little exercise, we don't even do it now, but something we can think about is we can all tell our stories in hero mode. You know, tell the story of our successes. Tell the story of our achievements, of how we've overcome, of the people that we've met. I mean, we can all think of people who are very good at telling the story in hero mode, and maybe we're that person, I don't know. Or perhaps we can tell the story in victim mode. You know, perhaps we can think of the missed opportunities that we've had and have gone, of the blunders, of the failures, of the embarrassments that we would rather like to forget, none of which, of course, was our fault, because we are the victim. It exaggerates, but you see what I mean? Those tendencies, quite easy, I think, to fall into those. We are able, of course, to spin our stories in different ways, and there's nothing wrong with that, because there are some very good biblical examples of the same story being spun in different ways for different purposes. Take the story, for instance, of the Exodus, the crossing the Red Sea, and the time in the desert in Sinai. If you look up all the references to that, and there are many of them, not least in the Psalms, which keep retelling that story, and we see it all told for different purposes. Is the story of in the wilderness, is it a story of a time of disobedience? We can pull out plenty of texts which will tell us that. Or is it a story of a very special revelation of God to his people? Again, we can pull out texts which tell us that. The same story retold for different purposes. We see it with the Apostle Paul. I mean, Paul in Philippians chapter 3, when he lists all those things, you don't need me to read it out now. You know about all those things. And he said, and I count them as rubbish. Tom Wright does remind us it's perhaps a little stronger than that. A very negative estimation of the story. If you compare that with Acts 26, where Paul is speaking, I think it's to Agrippa, he is giving his background, and he is using the same material that he's using with Philippians. He pulls up many of the same things, but he's saying, I have this privileged background, and that privileged background was fulfilled when I came to know Christ. There's a sense there. It's very hard actually to see that and read it as a conversion narrative, because in Paul's own telling, it's a fulfillment narrative. Who he was and what he became when he met the risen Christ, or rather when the risen Christ collared him on the road to Damascus. Same material, but used in different ways for different purposes. And one of the things I think about retirement is that it's often a time, I think, for revisiting our story. But retirement, often a time, I think, for us revisiting our story. A time for looking at our roots. How many people who are retired start looking for their family tree? Look at your roots. On last Sunday evening, we had in Chepstow what's called a Kamanvagani. Does that mean anything to anyone? Yeah. A hymn singing festival with Chepstow male voice. It was fantastic. And one of the things, my cousin came up and we gave the choir a few weeks ago to learn a hymn, Hermon. It was a tune. It was written by my great-grandfather for a Kamanvagani in Landor in Swansea, but over 100 years ago. And so we gave this to them, and Chepstow Male Voice learned it and presented it. And there was this sort of shiver down the spine, you know, when they sang that. And that sense of roots, reconnecting. What is my story? That's part of it, and valuing part of that story. And we enjoy, I'm sure others do too, retelling the story in company with friends, with family. And a gift perhaps to us in retirement is to be able to see our story through their perceptions as we share stories. But there are passages in Scripture which underline this, that I think in Psalm 139, Lord, you have searched me and know me. Yeah? And 1 Corinthians 13, about seeing in a mirror dimly, but then we shall know as we are known. And that deep sense, when we tell our story, that God is the one who holds our story without distortions, the distortions which are inevitable for us. I just read that book. Oh dear me. It's a hard read. It really is. It's Rowan Williams. Solidarity. It is a difficult one. But one insight that I want to come on to is that our identity is not a solitary exercise, but it's one that we develop in the company of others. And another insight from that book is that identity is not something which is static. My identity 10 years ago was as rector of Cheltenham. But that's what it was. Rather, identity is dynamic. Not in the sense of sort of Katie Price reinventing herself, but I am learning what it means to stand in solidarity with, well, who are you learning to stand in solidarity with? Because the whole idea of standing in solidarity is about recognizing that we receive from others, and receiving from others changes us. So identity as that kind of process and dynamic. Because one of the important questions, the first question is, what is my story? The second question is, to whom do I belong? Community. What community? Personal story. Moving out from ministry. It's the custom to move away from the parish, away from the people, the place you know. Harder in COVID. We found a place in Chepstow, which was a pragmatic choice, and we just trusted that God was in that choice. But moving in COVID, how do you settle into a new community in a pandemic? What church do you get involved with, and how, when you're not allowed to meet together? What engagement in the community? How can I be a good neighbor? And how can I put aside those familiar patterns of belonging? And one of the hardest, I think, is the change in a new community from being the pastor to being pastored. Really is tricky. And being pastored, when the pastor comes up to you with that look of, and then, how are you? And you just want to go, doof. Sorry. Oversharing. But it's a difficult translation of how you relate to people in community. Where do we belong? There are new possibilities. Dan hinted, rather foolishly got involved with local politics, and by accident, I assure you, I ended up as mayor for a year. It was great fun. You get some nice bling and get free concerts, but there's other stuff involved. Be involved in school governor. My wife getting involved in community gardening and so on. How do you engage where you belong? What online communities and so on. And community and also family. That is. Family and changing roles. I had never expected to retire when my wife and I had 3 parents living. All of them in care homes at opposite ends of the M4. See why we moved to Chepstow. And all of them have died since. But, oh dear, that means we're the top generation now. And we know what that means. And again, there's massive variation, isn't there, when it comes to children and grandchildren. And what are the expectations and opportunities and elderly relatives. And particularly in today's world, where are they? You know, my two sons are both in London. It'd be great to live near them. But house prices are, all these different factors. It's a question of balancing. Honor your father and mother. That was a commandment given to adults, not to children, to make them good. But how are we honoring father and mother when they're both in a care home? And I think the question reflects back as well. How can we be honorable parents and grandparents? How can we be honorable? How can we share Jesus with the family? And as a married couple, changing roles, spend more time together in the house. What does it mean to love one another when you've got to spend time together? Submit to each other. And then, I remember, I'm summarizing here, discussion. So me, right, retired now, what project can I get into? Yeah? Anna, my wife, retired now, we can spend more time together. Yeah? And debate and negotiate around those different poles. To whom do I belong? It's a very dynamic question because the demands and also the physical capabilities vary. The third aspect under this, what is my story, to whom do I belong, is what am I becoming? We might like to think of retirement as being in three phases: active retirement, quiet retirement, and decline. That's how it goes. And there are no guarantees about any of those, how long they might be. They come in that order, and that order's inevitable. But make plans wisely, I think, scripturally. Be realistic. Have you done a will? Have you sorted out your power of attorney with your children or whoever you might trust? We value relationships and experience over stuff. And of course, over 70, every year's a bonus. But do what you want to do before you get to 80, probably, because it might get a bit trickier then. So far, though, of course, and you might be thinking, all the perspective has been this worldly. Well, so be it, but we can revisit them. What is my story? Actually, my story is that I'm a sinner saved by grace at the cross. This is my story. This is my song. Yeah? To whom do I belong? My brothers and sisters, I am a citizen of heaven. I'm part of the body of Christ, the church. What am I becoming? That's an excuse to one of my favorite pictures by Piero della Francesca of the resurrection, the triumph. The Lord holding up an England flag, very appropriate this week. That was not the intention of Jesus or the artist, but there we are. What am I becoming? Look to the resurrection. Paul in prison to Philippians. There's an awful lot about identity, wanting to be with the people, but to be with Christ, which is far better. And you know, sometimes you can see that in believers who are nearing their end. That sense of letting go of this world in order to embrace the next. Not always, but sometimes. And when you do, it's beautiful. Third word, last one. Rest. Retirement. Retirement is neither work nor holiday. It's not work by definition, and it isn't holiday. One regularly hears people, I don't know how I ever found time, you can finish that sentence, however to find time to work. So what category do we use? If it's not work, it's not holiday. I think the best or a helpful biblical category is rest. Rest of life. That's the reminder. Also a hint of retirement, as Dan said, as the Sabbath of life. Genesis 1, we all know it. God created 6 days, and on the seventh day, he rested, and he saw that it was very good. So on the seventh day, rest means putting your feet up. God put his feet up on a celestial sofa. Afraid not. I'm not sure if that's the picture of rest that I want us to have. Rest is a very rich word biblically. And I explore it with you briefly with reference to Psalm 132. Fascinating psalm. And Psalm 132, verse 8 says, "Rise up, O Lord, and go to your resting place, you and the ark of your might." Picked up in verse 14. Verse 13. "For the Lord has chosen Zion, he has desired it for his habitation. This is my resting place forever. Here I will reside, for I have desired it. I will abundantly bless its provisions. I will satisfy its poor with bread. Its priests I will clothe with salvation, and its faithful will shout for joy." Old Testament scholar John Walton talks about the ancient Near Eastern background of taking rest as taking the seat of the power to reign. Taking the seat of power to reign. God's rule. God's rule. Something to enter his rest. And if we want to be creative about that, maybe we could even tie it in with the teaching of the kingdom of God in the New Testament. That's about God's dynamic reign, his rule. And in Hebrews, there's a lot, isn't there, about entering into rest. But for now, can I just pick out three things briefly? First, there is the reference to Zion. And the word I want to pick up is place. Place. The temple was in a real place, Jerusalem. Of course, it's had a very contested and difficult history since. But biblically, place matters. And we have to retire somewhere. Place matters. There may or may not be continuity, where we were before we retire. But in retirement, we can learn to appreciate the place where we are, which may or may not be the one that we choose. In due time, the place may be one which is chosen for us, as my sons kindly remind me from time to time. But the message of Jeremiah 29 is seek the welfare of where you are. Seek the welfare. There's a project. What does it mean to seek the welfare of the place where you are called to live? There's also a reference there to the poor. Provision. God provides for the poor. I mean, the truth is that sometimes retirement for some people can be a very self-indulgent time. I'm struggling here not to mention endless cruises. But we can easily think retirement is my time now. And retirement can be a time of spiritual drift. Think of Solomon. Classic, started well, but as he grew older, on into middle and older age, drift. Remember the poor. Poor biblically, the powerless, the people who don't count, the overlooked. Rowan's book I showed you earlier includes reflections about how do we stand in solidarity without patronizing and without being divisive. I mean, wonderful questions. If you want to raise questions about that afterwards, I'll just say, read the book. But important ones. Remember the poor. It has lifestyle implications and political implications as well, because poor is a power issue. In a world of inequality, how do we live in retirement? What's our attitude towards inheritance tax? What about care home fees? Should the state pay or we? What's the biblical perspective on that question? I just want to raise the issues. Okay. And the third word picking out of that psalm is joy. Joy, the resonance. Rest, joy is resonance, or rest rather, has resonance of fulfillment and contentment. On the seventh day, God didn't see that it was good, he saw that it was very good. God took delight in his work. And retirement, rest, among other things, I think gives us permission to pay attention to what gives us joy. You know, we need to balance that with what I said earlier about indulgence. But what gives you joy? My wife gets joy out of garden. Especially some of us can be driven by guilt. Oh, I ought to, I must. But rest gives permission, actually, to pay attention to what you delight in. And it also gives permission to say no, because it is rest. Not long after I retired, the bishop asked if I would do something, give a job, and I said no. Oh, it was so empowering. It was quite wonderful. I think it's the right answer as well, but there we are. Let me finish with a quote from William Cooper, hymn writer. God moves in mysterious ways, you know that one, and quite a few others. He was an interesting fellow, but he wrote a long poem, and when I say a long poem, it took 112 pages, called The Task, and in it there's some reflection about retirement. And I just want to quote some lines from that. How various his employments, whom the world calls idle, and who justly in return esteems that busy world an idler too. Friends, books, a garden, and perhaps his pen, delightful industry enjoyed at home, and nature in her cultivated trim, dressed to his taste, inviting him abroad. Can he want occupation who has these? Will he be idle who has much to enjoy? Yeah, I love that. Friends, books, garden, perhaps a pen, and he talks about a walk in the countryside. These are the delights of retirement. Well, we need to move towards a conclusion. I've got two sons. They're in their early 40s, David and Andrew. David, the older one, he read my book. Faithful lad. His comment was at least another 25 years until I get to this dad. But he made the same comment as another friend who is well retired, that many of the points we've been considering are not only for retired people, but are actually quite helpful for those for whom retirement is a distant dream or nightmare. The response, I think, my response was, yeah. I was trying to look at questions which do come to the fore with retirement. And I was reminded of that book. I don't know if anyone read that book. Yeah, Richard Rohr's Falling Upwards. Interesting book. When he talks about the first half of life, you set out to make your mark. Yeah? But like the Odyssey, there comes a point when you return home and recognize the need to return and make that different voyage. And I suspect many of the points I've been trying to talk about are points that relate to the journey home more than the journey outwards. The themes of noticing, where are they? Noticing identity and rest. Those are the themes. And the cautionary tale, when I set out looking at this, I think the first thing I said I want to do is to produce the theology of retirement. But I'm chastened by the experience because I'm now grateful just simply to have perhaps a few perspectives from the Bible on retirement that may help and challenge us indeed in retirement. And also it can help be the interval act between the tennis and the football. Dan.
Tudor, that was wonderful. Thank you for everything you've shared. And you've already given a round of applause. Let's give one more big thank you, big round of applause for Tudor. Really appreciate you sharing all your wisdom from this. There's lots of things buzzing in my mind already, but before I say any of those, I want to give you all a break. Now, at all the conferences I attend, usually the host or the MC takes the prerogative of asking the first question. Now, I have a few questions buzzing around in my mind, but I've decided I don't want to take that prerogative because I want to give as much time to all of you who have come out, especially tonight. So, anyone would like to be brave and be the first one? Okay, Ian.
Thanks, Tudor. I was interested in your comment on care home costs, which I think is a political hot potato. Speaking as someone who's power of attorney for the lady with dementia, I've spoken to numerous care homes. They always relax when you say she'll be self-funding. And one chain that's owned by a Christian entity, they said, oh yes, this would be a home for life. And we know if it ever switched to state funding, we'd get a lower fee. And that's fine. So the self-funders are subsidising the others, and it's a wealth transfer issue. I'm comfortable with that, but are you? And politically, you're well left of me.
I am comfortable with taking responsibility, and that is acting responsibly, I think. I think what I'm not comfortable with is the idea of saying I'm not going to pay for the care home because I must pass on my house and my possessions, inheritance, to the next generation. I think that lacks responsibility and integrity. But I know it is a political hot potato. And I don't think the Bible answers hot potatoes, but it raises questions. And I think, for me, that's how I would read it.
Who's next? Ian.
Thanks, Tudor. And yes, I have read the book and hugely enjoyed it and strongly recommend it to folks. I found myself particularly pondering on Sabbath rest. And I'm not sure I'd kind of quite properly done serious thinking about what Sabbath and rest meant. And I think all your stuff on that is really interesting. And I think it chimed with where I've been thinking, which is around the opportunity that retirement and older age has to get to the kernel of things, of what perhaps God is looking for in us. And that rest is a very active process. And I think you described that very well. But do you think for you, that is there a, you touched on Richard Rohr. I mean, do you think there's something new happening or
in terms of rest?
I don't know. Yes, in terms of the positive, what you talk about is how rest is an active process. It's not God putting his feet up.
Yeah.
Maybe rest is continuing sanctification, if we use a posh word.
Yes, I think it is. Rest is about the foretaste, the what am I becoming, what the future for us in the light of the resurrection is a glorious future. And to some extent we can anticipate that now. And Paul deals with that when in 2 Corinthians particularly, the great hope that we have in Christ in the middle of a world of persecution and falling apart. And that paradox that is something that we are working with and necessarily working with. You're talking about rest and working. I was talking with someone in the interval about work. Work, of course, is part of what it means to be human. It's a gift of God. Yeah? For many people, it becomes a burden, it becomes oppressive. Yes, look at Ecclesiastes. But it struck, God rested on the seventh day. And that was the foundation of the Sabbath rest. And then we look at John's Gospel. I can't remember which chapter it is. And Jesus heals a man on the Sabbath and is criticized for it. And his response in this case was, my Father is working and I am working. Hang on a minute, it's the Sabbath. I thought God was putting his feet up. No, John, he is working. And I think that Psalm 132 actually brings these things together. The rest of God is God's rule, but it's not excluding work. It's kind of redeeming it, if that makes some kind of sense. I think we can play with those ideas. There's some more hands rising.
Could I just add to that? You mentioned John Walton, and not to do name dropping, but that's just what I'll do. Rosie and I were just with John Walton in Turkey on a tour last week. Yeah, and we had some wonderful conversations with him. But one thing that I often teach on is his emphasis on in the ancient Near Eastern temples. When the temple was finally inaugurated, and usually the statue of the god would then be unveiled, but of course in the case of Yahweh there was no image because we are his image. But normally the idea was that the god would rest on his throne, and it was from that time, as the god rested on his throne, that the rule began, and that rule emanated from a place of rest. And so, the Lord said, heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool, and we have no statue there. But I sort of got the image when you were speaking of like, okay, if we are in his image, then our time comes to, in a way, you said we're the top generation. We have wisdom and experience, and we sit in a place of rest where we can notice maybe we'll say, it is very good, but we might say, things are not very good. What can I do to improve them? And
also, one of the things I write about in the book is one of the opportunities one has in retirement is not necessarily to be working, but to mentor and to be with people who are working, and to be the listening board, and to reflect and to ask those questions. That's a wonderful opportunity.
Thank you. We are told that on the seventh day God rested, but it doesn't end there, and he saw that it was good. So for many of us, we've had very busy working lives, and there will need to be a period of rest and recovery at the end of that. But then there's also a looking back, as you were talking about on the fun fair, which just made me queasy just to think about. But looking back and recognizing God's handiwork and seeing that it was good. But that also brings in, actually, when I look at things now and see that things are not good, I can fix it, even though it's a period of Sabbath.
And next door?
I'd like to reflect on the sabbatical year, which was a fairly strong teaching in Old Testament. And it appears that those in ministry and academics have the pattern of having sabbatical years throughout their life. But most of us come to retirement never having experienced sabbaticals, particularly if you work in the private sector. So the thought is, if we were to practice to a greater extent having sabbatical years, would retirement be such an issue? Because we would be in the pattern every 7 years of stepping back, reflecting, looking at our identity, etc., etc. And maybe that's the bigger question, that we actually follow. And indeed, at 50 years, we have a Jubilee year, which would mean we'd have, at 49 and 50, we'd have 2 years off.
That would be wonderful. I think one of the reflecting back on that, the thing about the Sabbath year and the Jubilee year was that it was communal. It wasn't just an individual having a time. It was everyone in society makes a readjustment. And the Jubilee year, the 50 years, was like a once in a lifetime, everyone back to square one. And it's that communal sense, I think, which gives it its power. And Jesus talked about, this is the year, this is fulfilled in Nazareth, that Nazareth manifesto. This is starting. So yeah, it would be that link is really important. I think significant.
Okay, Penny.
Yeah, I'd just like to talk about, if you like, the very end of retirement. My dad was 93 when he died, and he had to go into a care home for the last 18 months because he lost the use of his legs. But he spent, and he did this before he went into the care home, he would spend each morning with a prayer list, and he would pray for at least an hour to 2 hours a day for various different people, what was going on in the world, etc. And that's something that I don't think you really touched on, was actually retirement and rest can mean that you become more active in your prayer life. Certainly my father did. And I still have his prayer list that he had written down in his very shaky handwriting.
Thank you for that. That's really important. My aunt was rather like that. And interestingly, just as she came to the very end, she lost interest in it. It all faded away because she was ready to go. Her earthly work, I think, was done. So it's a great opportunity. My parents, my father died at the same age, but he had quite advanced dementia. And so prayer, it was almost beyond him. And there, I think, the theme is one of actually being held. And that was our prayer for him, that he would know that he was held. And when we visited, sometimes we would take some music along, and hymns, and he could respond. You could see some kind of response to those. And then one time we went, played those, and there was absolutely no response. And he died shortly after that, and we just knew that was going to happen. So that there are so many different paths and stories, but the Lord holds through all of that, and that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
Simon, yes.
Thank you. I turned 55 on Sunday, so I think I can officially retire now, apparently. But I've no plans to do that. But as someone looking ahead to that, however that's going to be, and also reflecting back on my children, their generation, is it going to be harder for the generations behind us? I'm just reflecting on, I think, the words that you said, noticing and rest. It seems to me that with everything going on, social media, distraction, what's rest and noticing going to look like for the generations coming up, and are things that we can do to help them with that?
Yeah, probably there are. I suspect to try and live as good a retirement so they can look at our retirement and say, that's the kind of retirement I would like to have. Perhaps it comes back to what I was trying to say about honouring father and mother, but being an honourable father and mother. So I owe it to them to have a good to make it a good retirement as a model? I don't know. I think, thinking also of my son, that generation, don't put your identity too much into your work. You are more than what you do. And to keep reassuring about that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. This will be our last question. Thank you, Gordon.
Probably appropriate. Thank you, Tudor. You talked a lot from Ecclesiastes, and the one word you missed out that comes up in my Bible is meaningless. When will your life be meaningless?
Yes, I think meaningless is another translation of hebel, which is translated vanity. So it is translated in different ways. Meaningless picks up that sense of hebel being vanity, insubstantial. Yeah, it lacks the other sense which is there in the Hebrew of temporary. Yeah.
Realization.
Well, all these things are temporary. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. You know, all his reflections. They all have some meaning, but not the ultimate meaning. The ultimate meaning is only found in the very end, fear God. Along the way, other things are shown to be hebel. Yeah? But that doesn't mean worthless. And that's important, I think, to say.
Right. Well,
Can I just say something about
okay, let me just
the
ask.
books?
I have one. I'm going to end with my last question, which is really a question for all of you, which is, what will you take away from this evening? And I hope that everyone has at least one thing, hopefully many things that you'll take away with you. And I hope it's not just the image of Jesus holding up the England flag. If that's all you take away, well, then vanity of vanities. But one thing that I will take away is you made a passing comment about active retirement, quiet retirement, and decline. And I was quite interested in the quiet retirement because I think we miss that. And of course, Penny's question addressed that a bit. That prayer is one of the things that we can do in that quiet retirement. And I think often I think we tend to think we've got to be active until the decline sets in. But is there an intentionality to that quiet retirement that we can sort of prepare for and plan for, and what does that mean? If I could just give you one last.
That's a really good question. I'm not sure what the answer is. I mean, I would say I'm in the active retirement phase, and if I'm being perfectly honest, I'm not looking forward to the quiet phase, and I'm not really paying it a great deal of attention. But that's I'm not saying that's a good thing. It probably isn't a good thing to do. And maybe you should take that question away. Yeah.
I should have opened with a prayer, but since I failed to do that, let's please close with a prayer and send you off on your way. Heavenly Father, we're thankful for your presence here with us tonight, for your gift of Tudor and his experience and wisdom in bringing all of this difficult, challenging topic into a place where we can reflect on it biblically and theologically and do that together. So we thank you, Lord, for this opportunity, and we pray that you will continue working in each of our lives and each of our hearts and each of our relationships and our communities so that we can be your people in your place who are blooming and growing even in the dimensions of our own identity into our retirement. And Lord, help us to do that. Help us to enable others to do that who are older than we are. And Lord, we pray that we will all be able to take home some very deep and meaningful aspects of this evening together. And we thank you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Can I just plug? There we are. Let's have the chance. The book. It's available at the back there. If you've got 10 quid, or if you want two, you can have two for 20. Then you can give me the money, or if you would like one, then you are very welcome. There's a slip of paper next to it, which has got my back's details, and I trust you implicitly. If you take a book and a backs one, you will, I am sure. If you forget, well, the Lord bless you, and may the book be a blessing to you. And when you remember, give it away to someone else. Yeah, and there's also, my boys published for me a book of poems and prayers that I'd also written. That's there, and that's a £5.
And you'll be signing books as well.
Well, if anyone wants a signed signature, they're very welcome. But
one final thing.
I've got a pen.
So much.
Yeah.
And